here to tell you about carbon emission is a One Young World ambassador who we first met at the London Summit in 2010, February 2010. And he had to have special dispensation to come to the summit because he was about 15, which means shouldn't be there. And his mom had to come with him. And he was about this big. And he phoned me a few weeks later and he said, no, he was very serious about skiing to the North Pole. And I was going, really? And I said, oh, and he said, oh, and I want to plant the One Young World flag at the North Pole. Now, obviously, you know me, I'm Mrs. Flag. I thought it was a really good idea. So I phoned David, and David said, and no joke, David said it's not a good idea if he goes there and he gets eaten by a polar bear. Which then one of his colleagues a few months later did. But we were so struck by this young person, so engaged with climate change and its effect on the ice, polar ice, that he was going off to ski to the North Pole, just him and one sort of guide person. And off he went, and he did it. And the following year, he went back and he did it again because he wanted to do it more efficiently and faster. And the only thing he asked me, he said, if I get to the North Pole, then can you introduce me to Sir Bob Geldof? So I took him to see Bob, and Mark and Gina very kindly arranged for him to see Bob. And he got his picture with Bob, and I know we all want a picture with Bob. Fantastic. Next thing, he turns around to us, and he's got people, a big scientific company, engaged with what he's doing. And David and I saw him speak at the World Economic Forum. And the next thing he says to us, no, I want to be the fastest to ski unsupported, unassisted to the South Pole by the longest route. So he went and he did that. When Bob said to him, what do you find the thing that's most difficult? He just turned back into a teenager again. He said, I can't get out of bed in the morning. So he has really put enormous effort into climate science, particularly ice science, climate change. He fought incredibly hard to get the One Young World community engaged in the ending of fossil fuel subsidies 4 years ago, where everybody wasn't sure that was the route to go. Parker was. Turns out Parker was absolutely right. So we've asked him to come on for just a few minutes to talk to you. It's not just about call on COP, but it just asked Parker, who's an expert on the matter, to just explain to you exactly why Paris is, as Mary and Mr. Nunn said last night, the Paris talks are, for you guys, your age group, absolutely seminal. So will you welcome onto the stage?
Hang on 1 second.
Sorry.
So I just have to try and find a way to segue from that amazing introduction to the fact that somebody has left their book and they're probably in need of this. So actually there's a sticker, whoever's lost their notebook with some great notes in it, there's a sticker on the back of it which says, Travel Massive, which I guess is a kind of a summary of what Parker has done, which makes that quite relevant. But I'm going to leave this down here, whoever the Travel Massive book is, it's on the front of stage.
That's what Parker does, Ski Massive.
And then the other quick thing I would really encourage you to do is just have all the highlights videos of One Young World are online on the YouTube channel. Just go and look at the 2010 one and look at Parker speaking then, and then look at the progress to the guy who you've seen today. And I think, you know, we think it's a fantastic example of a brilliant young leader and watching somebody develop and grow over the years. So with that, on that note, Parker.
In shoes, not ski boots, Parker Liautaud.
Thank you so much, David. Thanks, Kate.
And now he grew.
Yep. I think the first time I was here, I was 15 years old, 6 years ago. Anyway, as Kate and David said, my name is Parker Liautaud. I'm a returning ambassador, and I'm here to really set the stage for an issue that is going to be talked about a little bit later in the afternoon in more detail, but I'm only going to talk for a couple of minutes. Some of you, many of you may know that next month, or at the end of this month, in Paris, about 200 nations will come together and try to sign a globally binding treaty to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, last year in Peru, nations agreed to a draft treaty which effectively had countries submit voluntary pledges to what would become an agreement that would be legally binding when they sign it the following year. The idea of this was to give nations control over their own contributions in order to accelerate the process of signing a treaty, which has been going on for many years now. And these contributions would become known as the intended nationally determined contributions. And to an extent, the INDCs worked. 160 countries or so now have submitted pledges. I'm trying to get to the next slide here, but I think the clicker's not really working. Yep. Thank you. Thanks. The INDCs sort of worked because 160 or so nations have submitted pledges. But let's be clear. The projection for greenhouse gas emissions in 2030 within a business-as-usual scenario where we do nothing to address climate change is around 65 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. The INDCs put us on a trajectory to reach about half of where we need to go to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, which is approximately the threshold that countries have agreed upon to be the threshold of acceptable danger, so to speak. And these are also shown on the next slide. I guess this clicker is not. In any case, the INDCs served some purpose. But in order to get to a 2-degree world, we need to double the rate of decarbonization. We need to get to 42 billion metric tons in emissions at the most by 2030, which is only less than 15 years away. And then have that by 2050, and then get to complete decarbonization by the end of the century. So the INDCs are not good enough. And now we're in a position where these may seem like lines on a graph, but they're not arbitrary numbers. This is the difference between life and death for many families and many communities. It's the difference between a robust and healthy economy and $3 trillion in assets being wiped by the end of the century. It's very personal for many nations, especially the ones who are already starting to see the effects of climate change. These INDCs leave the poorest and the most vulnerable out to dry, and they leave them behind. And that's not acceptable. Now, this is the 23rd year of negotiations. These talks began before I was born. And I don't know about you, but I am tired of the gridlock. Because anybody who actually knows the process also knows that this is not necessary, that there isn't really an excuse. But this is our challenge. We have to close the gap. The governments of the world have given us the INDCs. It's what's been achieved in 23 years, and the rest is up to us. That means reevaluating the values that we promote in the private sector. It means pushing for domestic policy reform, and it means taking responsibility. Climate change represents the greatest threat to social equality that the world has ever seen. And whatever happens in Paris, we cannot fail in our responsibilities. Thank you.